Okay, welcome to the February 2018 version of Green Infrastructure, Climate and Cities. For those of you joining us for the first time, this is a collaborative seminar series that we're in, I guess, year 3, put on by the Consortium for Climate Risks in the Urban Northeast with a variety of partners that you see here on the screen. And this is our 2018 calendar. We're in the second month of 2018, and so this, we've got a variety of different topics every month, a different topic. We welcome you to join us for any of these talks. Sometimes the topics change. Today, we're focusing on microclimate conditions and management, and we have 3 speakers from New York City who are presenting virtually. And again, just for those of you joining us for the first time, all of our seminars are recorded and posted to the CCRUN website, so you can go back to 2014 and watch any of the talks that you may have missed in the past. We usually have between 1 and 3 speakers, and those of you attending online, because this is being broadcast simultaneously, you can submit questions. We have someone who will read those questions out loud, so you can interact with the speakers throughout the series. So today, I will just introduce the 3 speakers, and we will sequentially go through their talk. So our first presenter is Kizzy Charles Guzman from the Deputy Director of the New York City Mayor's Office of Recovery and Resiliency, followed by Kaz Ito, who is an epidemiologist at New York City Department of Health, and finally Dr. Lauren Smalls-Manty, who is a Drexel graduate, but got her PhD here just recently, and is now working as the Heat Resilience Coordinator for New York City under New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. So with that introduction, we look forward to the talks. I will shift over to Kizzy.
Okay, we're ready for the slides to be shared. Kizzy, whenever you're ready. Great. See you.
Okay, you're up.
Okay, now I'm ready. Sorry, I was muted. Well, everybody, thank you so much for asking me to join the webinar. Welcome, and thanks again for the invitation. Again, my name is Kizzy Charles Guzman, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Mayor's Office of Recovery and Resiliency. Today I'm going to give you a quick overview of our Full Neighborhoods New York City program, which is our comprehensive strategy that we just released last year to keep New Yorkers safe in extreme heat. I just wanted to start with some level setting here. What we do know in New York City is that we already face serious climate risks, of course. We have more than 8.5 million New Yorkers squished together in about 300 square miles of land. So it's almost half of the population of New York State. And heat is a real challenge for us, and it's a chronic condition that we see every summer. Here on the screen, you are seeing just snippets of some news coverage about heat waves over the years. In 2010, we had 5 separate events in which we had 2 or more days over 95 degrees. And there were 9 events.
Kizzy, I have to interrupt you. Right now you're only sharing Adobe PDF. You're not sharing that application with us right now. It's grayed out to us. So if you want to share multiple applications, you need to share your entire desktop.
Oh, I see. No, I have the PDF, right? So that the screen that you're seeing is the PDF, right?
Yeah, did you click off of the application for a moment? Because whenever you do that, it's going to, yeah, now we see a gray square. And now we don't.
Oh, I see.
Okay, cool.
How is this?
Oh, this is fine. Yeah, we see it all now. It's great. As long as you don't click off the application, we'll be fine.
Oh, I see. So I can't do multiple applications. That's the problem.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
That's fine. Great. So as long as you can see this now.
Yep, we're good.
Great. Okay, so here, I was saying that here's a few snippets from newspapers of different heat events we've experienced in New York City over the years. And in 2005, we had 5 separate events that were 2 or more days over 95 degrees. We had 9 events in total, if you count having 3 or more days of more than 90 degrees. And so that summer, we had 831 people visiting the emergency department for heat stress. And we had 243 people hospitalized for heat stress, and ultimately 11 people died. And I wanted to share some of these numbers because ultimately, we think that they are small individually, but the thing is that all of these deaths are preventable. In 2011, we had 34 heat-related heat stress deaths, and in 2013, 25 other New Yorkers. So just for context, in New York City, we had Hurricane Sandy claim the lives of 44 New Yorkers, and we are investing $22 billion to strengthen our neighborhoods, right, and make them more resilient to the risks of flooding and coastal storms. So what's really clear is that we also needed a heat plan. So taking a quick step back, we are the Mayor's Office of Recovery and Resiliency. We're part of the One NYC team, which is our citywide strategic plan released by Mayor de Blasio in 2015. And that strategic vision essentially lays out 4 areas of focus that are related to growth and wanting to have a thriving city, and equity, and also sustainability. And then I work in the resiliency shop, which is the pink triangle. So just to drill a little more into that, that means that our office implements the city's resiliency plan, which again is more than $20 billion of a multi-layered program. It has to do with coastal protection, it has to do with building resiliency, and I run the social and economic resiliency shop here. So our job is to develop and drive policy and initiatives that help mitigate and adapt New York City to climate change in general. And for me, I have a special charge on thinking about heat protection. So the way that we do this, sorry, I see that I was not advancing the slide. So the way that we do this, again, is coordinating efforts across many city agencies to ensure that New Yorkers are safe during these extreme weather events. For the neighborhoods chapter of One NYC, we have a particular focus on making sure that local businesses and community-based organizations are safe, because they strengthen communities, of course, they build the social and economic resilience of our neighborhoods, they're our social fabric. And we have a charge to kind of share best practices and make everyone aware of the tools and resources that the city offers in order to stay safe in the face of climate change. So back to the, yes? You can still see. Okay. So again, this is a national problem with heat. More Americans die from heat waves than from all other natural disasters combined. And then within that, we know that cities are more vulnerable, right? They tend to be hotter than their surroundings, and a phenomenon that we call the urban heat island effect. Again, in New York City, not only is it threatening our livability, we have a special focus on vulnerable people because of how they're impacted. And so on average, we see that every summer we have these numbers that you see on the screen, about 400 heat-related ED visits, over 100 hospital admissions, 13 heat stroke deaths, and 115 excess deaths from heat-related natural causes. So you might be asking, why the heck is the mayor's office giving you the health data? And this is an awesome partnership with our city's health department. They have an amazing syndromic surveillance team in place. And their job is to provide a lot of this data and information to help the city think about what were needed initiatives. And so kind of like assess our existing programs, right? Our cool roofs program on our local law. We have a requirement in the city that all roofs that are flat and that are new or they're undergoing renovations need to be painted white in order to help with reflectance. We have released climate resiliency design guidelines. We have a network of cooling centers. We had the New York City Million Trees Initiative, but we knew that somehow we were still seeing health impacts at the neighborhood level. And so together with a team of researchers, and I'll tell you more about our Urban Heat Island Working Group in a moment, we started to look at where in the city, so this is a map of New York City on your screen, with the darker color being areas of very high heat vulnerability. And lower color meaning lower vulnerability. But this map was developed by the city's health department in collaboration with Columbia University. And it just basically helping us to visualize that some neighborhoods are more at risk, but that in every neighborhood there are vulnerable groups living in within them, right? So older adults, people of low income, those that have certain health conditions. And so this gave us the charge, like having all this health data, gave us the charge to then do the appropriate kind of fundraising and convening to understand what strategies were needed and where we could focus and target our capital investments. So a few years ago, the city launched the Urban Heat Island Working Group that was convened by my office, ORR. It was tasked with evaluating the best available science so that we could invest in better data collection and monitoring of neighborhood level temperatures. We wanted to understand what information existed in terms of needed interventions and real-world metrics, and how we can assess the effectiveness of green infrastructure and the effectiveness of other green strategies that are employed nationally and internationally. And we set them up into two committees, one that was more focused on the technical piece of research needs that the city needed to understand neighborhood level temperature variation, and that's actually the purpose of the rest of this webinar, so I'm just giving you some context. And then best practices. There was a policy committee that was thinking about what investments and policies and programs might help us adapt and mitigate to the impact of heat. So again, this working group was made up of city agencies. You have them in the screen, so our health department, environmental protection department, emergency management, parks department, transportation, and so on. Also a handful of academic partners and a handful of partners from the not-for-profit sector, right? So we had assistance from a variety of practitioners who were able to tell us, hey, this is what's happening across the United States, and this is what we see as effective interventions that New York City can consider and how it can ramp up its efforts. And the result of that engagement was the strategy that I mentioned before. It's called Cool Neighborhoods NYC, and we released that plan in June of 2017, so it's brand new. And essentially, it's a $106 million commitment out of the New York City budget. So it's not small. It's a 4-year strategy. The design principles were around protecting and preparing New Yorkers. So it was a strong focus on adaptation as well as mitigation, focusing on vulnerable populations and on historically underserved communities. It had a strong focus on enhancing quality of life and doing what we could to promote community cohesion. While utilizing existing networks and existing resources, and with, of course, a clear goal of disseminating climate information and putting in that health perspective that helps us bring that kind of climate science down to the community level and become relevant to people. So there were 4 main components of that plan. And I am not going to get deeply into detail on all of them, but the next few slides are just going to give you a sense of what it entails. If you have questions about the programmatic side of things, please feel free to ask at the end of this webinar or at the end of our presentations, and I can get into more detail about that at that time. But essentially, the first component of it was related to tree planting, and of course it's because we know that green infrastructure and natural infrastructure helps to provide shade and relieve heat stress, aside from a slew of other co-benefits, right? Everything from improving local air quality to social co-benefits related to people feeling like, you know, their neighborhood is nice and they can come outside and meet their neighbors and there is shade and they feel safe and protected. But ultimately, we wanted to mitigate the urban heat island effect and then understand where in the city we needed to concentrate these tree plantings. And so we're investing $82 million actually to plant street trees strategically along city streets and key neighborhoods in the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn and in Northern Manhattan, and also to plan for reforestation of small parks and forests, right? So again, always targeting those key vulnerable neighborhoods. And the idea is for those places that had less green, let's make them greener as a protective strategy. So here are just some before and after pictures to share from our parks department, and just the huge difference. I hope I don't have to convince you that trees are awesome and that they contribute to quality of life. But here are some photos of our street tree plantings and how just in 5 years it really changes the character of the streets, right? And the experience of walking down the street in a hot summer day. With forest restoration and with park trees, we also see that the environmental benefits are significant. So that's what we're putting the bulk of our funding for Cool Neighborhoods. We also had an existing program called the New York City Cool Roofs Program, and what we started to do was to think just quickly about where were the existing cool roofs, and that program was already funded, and so that's the map you see on the right. We decided to then, we did some research about how we could really expand the the effect of these roofs if we were targeting them and if we were concentrating them in clusters. And so what we did is that we made a policy plan based on this data to target roofs in private and public buildings in the same heat vulnerable neighborhoods. So again, if it's a hot summer day, you don't wear a black shirt to go outside, you probably wear a lighter color. And so that's what we're hoping to do, both with the trees and also with the black tar roofs that we have in the city, right? So conducting strategic outreach to owners, to building owners is a big part of what we're spending a lot of time doing right now. So just this is quick, but just to show you that this was our analysis. So just basically taking a look at where we already had cool roofs and then where were target zones so that we can really maximize that effort and that impact of several clusters of buildings together. And then that's how we came up with a list of recommended cool roofs, which is almost 2.7 million square feet of target intervention there. So that's kind of cool. Again, it's funding we already had, and now we're just targeting it to get heat benefits, or heat reduction benefits. An adaptation strategy we just launched. It's called Be a Buddy NYC, and that is a health-based pilot that is now run out of the city's Department of Health. It's about promoting social cohesion and creating buddy systems, right, that can be activated during heat waves, which again are chronic over the summer months. And so we think that if we can enhance the response capacity and preparedness of partner community-based organizations and volunteer networks, and if we're practicing this stuff during what we call blue sky scenarios, then during other climate emergencies, we'll have this well-trained and well-connected group that can assist the city to provide essential services when we can't get there. Another big priority for that initiative is to help to identify people who are relatively isolated and are not connected to city services and resources. And again, it's because our health department data shows that most of people that are dying during heat waves were exposed at home, right? And so there's something about being isolated and not having access to air conditioning, and we need to get the right messaging with trusted messengers to New Yorkers that are low income and that have, other health risks. Okay, and then finally, another component of our Cool Neighborhoods NYC program is about providing information to home health aides. And we're focused on them because they can be perfect partners in building heat resilience. So we created a curriculum in collaboration with the Department of Small Business Services, which permits them, and also with the health department, so that we can have this heat risk training embedded in their continuing education curriculum, which is required of all home health aides. So that way we plan to reach about 8,000 of them via a partnership that we established with 3 home care agencies. And that's, again, really cool. Maybe you don't think it's cool, but I do. Because the populations that are served by home health aides are precisely the most vulnerable to heat impact. So it's an aging client base. They're homebound. They tend to have significant physical and mental health issues. So it's a way of getting, again, those trusted messengers that can really take a quick look and say, oh, this person, there is no air conditioning in the home. I need to connect them with the city resource in order to be able to make sure my clients are safe during extreme heat days. So we can provide this kind of hydration information or other life-protecting tips. So I'll stop there and hand it over to Cass to describe a bit about our monitoring and research strategy. We did invest $300,000, which it isn't a lot, but we are going to launch a neighborhood-level outdoor and indoor temperature network. In order to establish a baseline, we want to understand the spatial distribution of temperature in priority and controlled neighborhoods. So we can, as we put all this money in our cool neighborhoods target areas, we can assess the effectiveness of our interventions. We think that this data is going to allow the city to understand this relationship between indoor and outdoor temperature, because we also plan to pursue opportunities to do indoor temperature monitoring in the same places that we're doing outdoor temperature monitoring. And at the end of the day, this will allow us to ground truth some of the finer scale model temperature patterns that we see our academic partners put out. So there are many opportunities related to research that we can get into during the Q&A, but one area that is still missing, and as we ramp up, we'll take an eye to this temporal research. So this is the perfect opportunity. We're going around planting more trees, making investments on cooling strategies. And there's something interesting about doing longitudinal research before and after these interventions have taken place and kind of understanding how heat has changed, if at all, right? How our temperature profile of our neighborhoods is changing over time. So I'll stop there and let Cass take us to the next step. I'm happy to answer any questions after. Thank you.
Thank you, Kizzy. So as we're moving over, I'll just ask if there's any brief questions directly about your presentation or looking at the room. Okay, so we'll move, I guess maybe we'll do questions at the end if there's no, so we'll move on to. Okay, Kaz, we can see you. There you go. There we go.
Right. There we go.
Perfect.
All right, great. Thank you.
Okay. Do you hear me?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. I'm Kaz Ito, presenting these slides, but Sarah Johnson from our bureau also was the hands-on data analyst on this analysis, but she had to leave to pick up kids, so I'm presenting. I should also mention that this New York City Community Air Survey data analysis, more people than just Sarah and I obviously contributed, but this particular set of analysis, understanding the role of vegetation on intra-urban variation of temperature was basically, we did this because of the communication with Kizzy. She was interested in developing a citywide temperature network, and we pointed out that this air pollution network is already collecting temperature. And so the objective of this air pollution network was really to collect air pollution, including fine particles and nitrogen dioxide, but to adjust for the flow volume of filters, we were measuring the ambient temperature as you can see in this box. This box collects the fine particles and other pollutants. The one issue for using this data to evaluate temperature is that, as you can see, the box is exposed. So depending on how sun is shining on the box, that can influence the spatial variation. So what we did for this purpose was to only look at the nighttime 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. temperature when the influence of the variation of shading on these boxes not concerned. So we started out with 150 sites in 2008. And the number of sites got reduced to 100 in 2011 and 60 sites in 2013. Now we're back to 75 sites. It was really designed to capture the major air pollution sources such as traffic. The temperature data was collected for every 15 minutes, and each of these 150 sites collected 2-week samples for every season. But the temperature data were available when the air pollution was collected, except the 5 what we call reference sites in parks that continuously collected data. So this shows the spatial variation of temperature. This is temporarily adjusted for 2010. You can see that this is kind of the picture of the urban heat island effects. The range of temperatures, this is nighttime again, we're talking about 67 to 77. So we're talking about 10 degree difference, 10 degree Fahrenheit difference at nighttime. And to model the spatial variation of this temperature, we conducted what they call land use regression, trying to explain the spatial variation with the various land use variables. And for this analysis, we incorporated what is called the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, NDVI. this is the satellite-based data from 2010. And then from the Parks and Recreation Department, we had more spatially resolved tree cover, green vegetation, vegetative coverage, including trees, grass, and shrubs. And to estimate the impacts of buildings, we used square kilometer of built space coming from the Department of City Planning, they call Map Pluto. And another important factor is the imperviousness of the surface. This came from the U.S. Geological Survey. So for each of these variables, we computed 15 buffers because how the buffering distance affects various way to the site. So we looked at starting from 50 meters, 100 meters, and so on. We had 15 buffers. And so each of the buffer distance, we would evaluate correlation between each of these prediction variables against the spatial variation of temperature. And then we conducted land use regression. This land use regression variables is essentially we are following the same approach we used to estimate the emission sources on air pollutants. And we start out with adjusting the temperature based on how the temporal variation affects them. So we adjust for that and come up with the sort of a constant average temperature across these sites. And then we include one by one first each of these 5 predictors to estimate the variation of 3 to 5 a.m. temperature. And we have this standard approach of stepwise regression, and we look at how the R square increase, the significance of the coefficient, and also suppress the model that has too much collinearity. Now, so I'm just presenting the final model, what variables are important at what buffer. And so what remained in the model was the average NDVI within 1,000 meter. And this variable was essentially, this is a greenness variable was negatively associated as we would expect. So this basically captures the contrast between suburban type landscape versus the more center city like Manhattan. And what was positively associated as expected was the square kilometer of built space within 600 meter. So this is sort of suggests the heat retention of the buildings, waste heat, and also traffic. They are all sort of correlated, but also the high density of built space means lack of vegetation. And what was interesting was the vegetative cover within 200 meter buffer was negatively associated. So what remained in the model was, in addition to this sort of large scale greenness represented by NDVI, we have relatively small scale influence of vegetative cover, representing shade, heat absorption, lack of impervious surface. What's good about this finding is that, so it's kind of hopeful that vegetative cover within 200 meter can reduce the temperature. So 200 meter buffer is really approximately, we're talking about 3 blocks by 3 blocks, 3 city blocks. And because we used multiple years of data, we also included the year. And to adjust for unexplained spatial variations, we included the smooth function of XY coordinates. Just to show you the relationship between here in these two figures, y-axis is the 3 to 5 a.m. temperature, and x-axis, the left one is the square kilometer vegetative cover within 200 meters. And to the right side, you have the NDVI within 1,000 meters. So what you can see, and also the point of this figure is that we sort of stratified the data by the built density, going from the low built density, that's the sort of outer part of the city, like Staten Island, Queens, and then high built density, that's like Manhattan. And you can see that across this range of density, we can still see in each of strata by the built density, you still see the slope, negative slope of temperature decreasing by the square kilometer of vegetative cover within 200 meters. These three things we are pointing to is the sort of exceptions. For example, Central Park, even though it's surrounding the site is a lot of greens within 200 meters, if you go out 600 meters, you are already including the high density of buildings. So considering, despite the fact that Central Park, the immediate vegetative cover is quite high, influence of the buildings surrounding the park is manifest by these high temperatures. And similarly, like Prospect Park also. So even if you stratify the built density, you consistently see the negative slope of temperature by the vegetative cover, even though the magnitude is different. So if you are looking at the very high built density, within that strata, the slope is not that steep. So just to look at the data in another way, so the previous models were including the linear relationship between temperature and each of these variables, but we could also look at the smooth function of the temperature as the vegetation cover. So here what you're seeing is the temperature reduction as a function of x-axis is the square kilometer of vegetation within 200 meters. You can see that where the vegetative cover is really low, you don't see much influence or change in the temperature. But once you go up to 0.02, sort of a lower range of the vegetative cover, you start seeing the slope going down more. So this is hopeful in the sense that from relatively low, but not too low vegetative cover and increasing the vegetation coverage, you do see about, here in this case, about 1 degree drop per about 0.04 square kilometer in vegetative cover. Now, this information is useful for planning where to plant trees, but this information alone cannot be used because you also have to consider tree stocking capacity. Some areas already have trees, and it's hard to put more trees in some of the areas with a lot of developed surfaces. We also need to consider population density. There's no point in planting a lot of trees where not too many people are there. And then we also have to consider vulnerable populations. As Kizzy was showing earlier in her slides, we have identified certain area of the New York City where we expect more impacts of heat. So we should focus on planting trees in these streets. So it's not just a simple process. Now, just to give an idea of what it means from going 0.01, how much, to get the idea of what it takes to plant trees to change 1 degree change. Here we are showing an example of the neighborhood where vegetative cover within 200 meters was 0.01. And that's Washington Heights. That's one of the high heat vulnerability index neighborhood. That's on the left side. On the right side is the Warm Hill that's near the downtown, but it's not high vulnerability neighborhood. So you can see that it takes some effort to change from this low tree density, high street tree densities. Now, so in summary, vegetation is negatively associated with temperature in two ways. So large-scale suburban to urban gradient explained by NDVI. And in summertime, I forgot to mention, so we had summer-only model. It was more clear that smaller scale, 200-meter buffer vegetative cover was important predictor of temperature reduction. So small and non-significant slope in areas of high built density suggests that targeting medium density areas may have a bigger impact, which is a good news. Now, so interpretation of the negative slope of vegetative cover versus temperature for practical application requires additional analysis on considering land use, stocking capacity, and vulnerable populations. But we have enough information to start planning. And in fact, I think the mayor's office already had a plan for where to target tree planting. So what we are trying to do with Lauren, who's speaking next, with Parks and the mayor's office is to basically measure the baseline temperature of these high heat vulnerability index neighborhoods now in about 500 locations, just to record the baseline of what it is now and come back in, say, 5 or 10 years after planting trees to see how they change. So that's what we're working on. And I'll respond to any questions after the Lauren's talk.
Okay.
And with that, just...
Thank you. Yeah, so we'll move on to Lauren and then ask questions at the end, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I need to stop sharing. Okay. I can. Okay. Got it.
Okay, Lauren, you're up.
Hi, I'm Lauren Smalls-Monte, and so I will be presenting a little bit of my dissertation research that was done at Drexel University, and I looked at the role of green infrastructure and the mitigation of the urban heat island intensity at sites around New York City. So it sort of relates to what the effort that we're trying to do with the Cool Neighborhoods program. So just a little review, the urban heat island intensity is simply the difference between the air temperature or surface temperature of an urban and rural environment. And this is not new. It's been studied for many, many years, like Luke Howard, where he conducted a 30-year study in London, where he looked at the differences between the London city urban temperatures and the rural London temperatures, and found that there was a difference between the two. So basically you get these differences in air temperature because you have impervious surfaces in the urban environment, and in the rural environments you have more pervious surfaces. And to the right of the screen is a diurnal plot showing the differences, the air temperature differences that you see between the urban and rural environment. The red line represents the urban environment and the green line represents the rural environment. In the bottom half of the graph, you can see the urban heat island intensity. And this value is usually greatest during the nighttime hours when the urban and rural surfaces have the most differences between their temperatures. So some ways in which we can reduce the urban heat island intensity is through vegetation. And vegetation reduces this number through shading and a process called evapotranspiration. And we'll go a little bit through what evapotranspiration is later on in the presentation. And in New York City, the introduction of vegetation in the past couple of years has primarily been through the introduction of stormwater green infrastructure sites. And so this is what we focused our study on. So stormwater green infrastructure sites usually contain an engineered soil mix and a specialized plant palette that allows for water to be stored, increased water to be stored at the site during wet weather events. So right now there are many studies that cite that green infrastructure has many co-benefits, and one of these co-benefits is temperature reduction, but there really there aren't a lot of studies out there that actually quantify this value. So we think it's there. So this study is more of a comprehensive study that looks at how green infrastructure or stormwater green infrastructure in general it reduces urban temperatures. So previous research that is out there is that stormwater green infrastructure creates higher evapotranspiration rates at the sites, and this is shown in this graph here. We take care of a lot of sites in New York City, and so what we noticed was that the traditional sites such as parks or green infrastructure sites that don't have the special soil mix actually have a lower evapotranspiration rate than some of the newly implemented green infrastructure sites that we're implementing circled in the. So we think that these green infrastructure sites may have more co-benefits than parks in regards to, because it has higher rates of evapotranspiration and it has the canopy cover through the trees that are implemented. And this is just to show that most of the studies out there do show the success of vegetation mitigating the urban heat island intensity. However, most of this research is focused on trees, lots of trees together, or in a plant palette that's not similar to what is found in green infrastructure sites. So some of the research gaps that I identified through my dissertation work is that few studies quantify the co-benefits of stormwater green infrastructure. And this specifically, there's a need for a surface energy balance at the ground level. And few studies also evaluate the long-term impacts of stormwater green infrastructure on the microclimate, meaning temperature reductions or how it's impacting a neighborhood as a whole. So some of the areas that we could look at are plant age, pre and post green infrastructure installation, or pre and post green infrastructure installation. We also saw that few studies are verified through field data. So actually my dissertation involved not only monitoring data, but also using a model to simulate a microclimate in a neighborhood. And few of these models that are used to evaluate urban heat island intensity are verified through field data. So we wanted to see how well these match up. So the overarching research goal was to quantify the potential role of stormwater green infrastructure in the mitigation of the urban heat island intensity. And so when you're talking about urban heat island intensity, there are two layers where it can be measured. The urban boundary layer is the top layer, or at the mesoscale layer, and this is from the rooftop and above. And this is usually through satellite measurements or fixed tower measurements. And the urban canopy layer, which include the microclimate studies, and this is from the rooftop level and below. And this is what we are focusing on in this presentation. So field studies and mobile studies usually are ways in which the urban heat island intensity is monitored in this layer. So I have to give a little background because not only did we measure microclimate variables, we actually used it to calculate an energy balance in the city. So when you're considering within the two boundary layers, an energy balance exists, and this is, we're going to go through each of these components separately. So the net radiation is the sum of the incoming and outgoing net and net shortwave and long wave radiation. So this is the radiation coming into coming from the sun and out into the environment. The surface soil heat flux is simply a transfer of energy between the surface and the subsurface, so the soil and then going down into the surface. And this is mainly a process that's driven by conduction. And it's a conduction principle and driven by a temperature gradient, which is important to remember. So the sensible heat flux, which is shown here, is the energy transfer between the air and the surface. And this can be done through both convection and conduction, and it's also driven by a temperature gradient. And the last one is the latent energy flux, which is the product between the latent heat of vaporization and evapotranspiration. And this requires a phase change. So remember, we talked about the sensible heat flux and the sensible heat flux, and the surface soil heat flux, which require a temperature gradient in order to occur. And then the latent, it's the one that requires a phase change. And so we just to go into evapotranspiration a little more, evapotranspiration is the dual process of both evaporation of water from the soil surface or the leaf of a plant, and transpiration of water through a plant. And you need 4 components in order for this to occur. You need 5 components in order for this to occur. You need radiation from the sun, wind or turbulence to create the pressure gradient, which is needed to drive the process. And you also need water through soil moisture. So in order to collect the microclimate variables, each of the sites, which I'll go into, contain the weather station, which is shown here. And we measured weather microclimate parameters such as precipitation, wind speed and direction, radiation, and air and relative humidity. We also use the Lysimeter, which is simply a device that directly measures evapotranspiration. So basically what it is a soil column or a soil section sitting on a scale. And as the water evaporates from the soil section, or water is added to the soil section, the mass on the scale changes, so you can see how much water leaves or enters the soil column, and then it's representative of what's going on at the site. So I use both ground level and rooftop level monitoring sites. So the first one I used was the Jacob Javits Convention Center, and we measured both on the roof surface and at the street level on the east side. So you can see number 2 is the street level station, and we also measured on a metal roof. We used the north green roof, which is the most mature roof. That was the green roof section first completed. And the south roof, which was initially a black roof in our studies and later converted into a green roof. The 2 ground level sites that I used for this study were Turn Mashville and Colfax, and they're both located in Queens, New York. They're less than a mile apart, so it's a walkable distance. And these are former green streets that were, these are green infrastructure, bioretention green infrastructure sites, which have the engineered soil, media, and plant palette conducive to high evapotranspiration rate. Remember when we were talking about urban heat island intensity, we talked about an urban and rural environment. So because we wanted to look at the urban heat island intensity in New York City, we used a reference site located in New York City, and this was Alley Pond Park, which is also located in Queens, New York. And we have a canopy climate station as shown in the picture on the left. So just a little data measurement. The data was logged at 5-minute intervals, and then it's presented in hourly or 3-hourly intervals, and we use non-parametric statistical testing. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of the results, not all of them that I had. If you want further details, you can read my entire thesis, which should be online. So again, the overall research goal was to quantify the potential role of stormwater green infrastructure in mitigating urban heat island intensity in New York. And I wanted to look at 3 objectives, which was first to explore the microclimate and energy fluxes on a large-scale green roof. The second was to quantify the influence of ground level green infrastructure on air temperature, ET, and surface energy fluxes. And third, I simulated a 3D microclimate to evaluate the quantified influence of green infrastructure on the neighborhood. So let's first look at the first objective. And the 3 research questions that I wanted to answer was, does a large-scale green roof reduce the local air temperature? Does a large-scale green roof alter the local energy balance? And does the green roof alter the local urban heat island intensity? And just for reminders, so I had to use notations for the roof. So these are those notations. So the first question, does the green roof reduce the local air temperature? This is a plot showing the air temperature difference between the metal roof, south roof, and street level station versus the north green roof, which if you remember before, I said that's the most mature roof. So with these temperature difference, you can see that the dotted line denotes the beginning of the green roof installation and of the south roof, and the solid line denotes the end of the green roof installation of the south roof. And you can see that the south green roof, which has the arrows pointing to, is actually similar to the air temperature differences between the metal roof and street level stations. So this is when the south roof, was a black roof. So basically the black roof had high temperature differences throughout its lifetime. However, after greening, the south roof temperatures became closer to the north green roof temperatures, as seen throughout the lifetime of the roof. And if you look at this monthly on a spatial cell, you can see that the north green roof always has a different, this graph is showing the statistical differences between the two, whether it's significant or not. And the purple boxes show the statistical difference. And so that they're statistically different, the roof pairs located on the left side, and the red shows that the roof pairs are statistically similar. So you can always see that the north green roof always has a statistically different air temperature than all of the other roofs, except for the south green roof during the noted months. The south green roof is different only in the summer from the street level station and from the metal roof. However, the south green roof is statistically similar to the street level station and metal roof. We don't necessarily know the reason why. We have a couple of hypotheses, but we're not really sure why this is occurring. But we can say that the street level station and the metal roof always have statistically similar air temperature. So to answer the question, does the large-scale green roof reduce the local air temperatures? Yet, but during the summer, during the summer, both the green roof air temperatures are greater than the street level station and the metal roof. The air temperature on both sides of the green roofs are not statistically similar, which is surprising to us because we would think that they are similar since they're two green roofs. And then another surprising result was that the south green roof air temperatures were similar in some months to the street level and metal roof station. So the next question, does the large scale green roof alter the local energy balance? So in order to do this, we calculated a residual energy, which basically is which we took the energy fluxes that we calculated and calculated from the difference of the net radiation in the the latent energy, a residual. And this residual represents the available energy to heat the environment, because the energy is not going into evapotranspiration. So you can see that the street level station has the highest residual energy, and this is located at the pedestrian level. And the south green roof of the green roof has the lowest residual energy, which is what you would expect. And we see from the conversion of the black roof to the south green roof, a reduction in residual energy. Remember, that's the energy left over to heat the environment, a reduction of 50%, 35%, and 56% for the spring, summer, and autumn season. So this is a big reduction with the introduction of the green roof. So we did see that it did alter the local energy balance. And so now we'll look at how the green roof alters the local urban heat island intensity. And so initially we did it for all seasons, but we'll just look at one season, which is the summer. And we can see that the north green roof has the lowest urban heat island intensity during the day and also during the night. The metal roof in the street level station has similar urban heat islands and the highest during the day and also at night. So to answer the question, yes, and you can, the north green roof reduced summer maximum daytime temperatures by 1.15 degrees Celsius compared to the street level station, and reduced summer average nighttime urban heat island temperatures 0.92 Celsius compared to the street level station. So looking at objective 2, we wanted to quantify we're going to move to the ground level stations. We wanted to quantify the influence of ground level green infrastructure on air temperature, ET, and surface energy fluxes. And to do this, I wanted to simply ask this question. So remember I was mentioning that there's a theory that if we're putting in all these stormwater green infrastructure sites, they must be giving off greater ET, which is what we saw in the introduction graph, where all of the green infrastructure sites have higher evapotranspiration rates than the park. So if this is true, a higher soil moisture must equal higher latent energies, or ET, and this causes a reduction in temperature because that energy, that increase in latent energy, uses the available energy that would have been going into heating up the environment. So basically, we wanted to answer this question: does the stormwater follow the theory I just explained before? And this is just to remind you of all the energy balance fluxes that were introduced previously. So first we look at the first half of this question. Does an increase in soil moisture also increase the latent energy flux? And to do this, I have a graph here which shows the months, and on the y-axis, and on the x-axis shows the difference between the latent energy of Nashville and Colfax. So the thing to remember about Nashville and Colfax is that Nashville receives water through an inlet. So it receives street runoff water from the street during a wet weather event. However, Colfax does not receive water from the street and only receives direct rainfall. So in essence, Nashville receives more water, and we wanted to see if the reception of more water into the site causes the latent energy flux to increase. The bar on the right-hand side, which is colored blue, different shades of blue, shows the significance level or the p-value of the corresponding months. So if it's darker blue, it means that the differences are significantly similar. So from the graph, you can see that most of the red bars are to the right of the line, which means that Nashville maintains a higher latent energy than Colfax almost always. And these are, and when I'm talking about this inclusion, it means the statistically significant results. And you can take my word for it. We also did soil moisture studies at the site, and Nashville does maintain a higher soil moisture than Colfax. So we do have some months where the latent energy was similar in our study, and we think that this could be due to replanting or plant death that occurred in the Lysimeter. So, So now that we've answered the first half, we'll go to the second half of the question, which is if you have an increase in latent energy, does this translate into lower urban heat island intensity values? And so this graph shows the air temperature differences between Nashville and Colfax, and we measured the air temperature at a height of about 11 feet in the middle of the site. And you can see that the points are actually similar, are along the anomaly points are along the zero line, and that none of the months show statistically different results. So in essence, the conclusion for this is that the air temperature in Nashville and Colfax are pretty much the same. Of course, this is not a result that we were expecting. So half of our theory was not proven true, was proven not true. And, I did all this work and came to this reaction. I was not the most pleased person. But then we try to think about why this is occurring, or why we may not see these temperature reductions, because we do have increased ET at the site, at Nashville site. So we wanted to look at how the energy is partitioned at a site, and we chose to do this during a heat wave, which is the most extreme case. So we looked at from the start of the heat wave until the end. And there are a whole sets of graphs for this, but in the interest of time, I'll just present the results of that. And so the result of that is that Nashville maintains a steady partitions greater than 40% latent energy at the site almost always, compared to Colfax, which is less than 40%. And so when you're thinking about extreme events or extreme conditions, you would want a site that is more consistent in its energy balance, because what is getting you're getting, whereas Colfax has fluctuates in its energy balance more than Nashville. So you may not be getting a consistent benefits out of Colfax. So here we can see the difference between a site that receives water and a site that does from the street, and a site that just receives direct rainfall. So to look at the third objective, I created a 3D neighborhood of Nashville and Colfax using the and a program which I'll explain later. But I wanted to answer the two questions: does individual stormwater green infrastructure sites contribute to the neighborhood microclimate? And do you have to plant these green infrastructure sites at a certain density or a certain configuration in order to see some effects on the neighborhood? So I use the MVMet model, which is a 3D microclimate model, and uses a couple of layers, including a 1D boundary layer and some submodels, which accounts for atmospheric variations, vegetation, and soil. And to measure, one of the measures that I looked at was the PMV value, which is the predicted mean vote model. And this basically is air temperature is relative to how a person feels. So this tries to take into account how humans feel and how they're impressed by the air temperature changes that occur. So this is a scale as shown on the bottom figure, and goes from, this one goes from -4 to 4. So as you increase in numbers, it means that the human is feeling very hot, and as you decrease in numbers, it means that it's cooler. So as I mentioned before, I created a model of both Colfax and Nashville, and the dotted circle on the left side and on the right side of the two aerial shots is where the actual green infrastructure sites are located. So they're located in relatively the middle of this model architecture. So I created 4 model scenarios. The first one was with no green infrastructure. So this is all of the green infrastructure with the stormwater green infrastructure, Nashville and Colfax removed. I created the current scenario, which has the model green infrastructure, Nashville and Colfax. And then I created 2 scenarios, which include a right-of-way green infrastructure facility, which is basically similar to implementing a street tree. So you can, this neighborhood in Queens did have street tree plots, but you can see that this street tree is very small. So most of the trees that were implemented in the program are aged more than this tree. So probably around like 5 or 6 years. So it does create a canopy layer. So I created this right-of-way green infrastructure with trees and without trees. So this is a picture of my model scenario, the no green infrastructure scenario, the current green infrastructure scenario with the green infrastructure highlighted in the red circle. The right-of-way green infrastructure, and this is without the trees. And then this is a right-of-way green infrastructure with the trees. And if you follow the circle, it should, in all of the plots, the green infrastructure, site Nashville and Colfax are identified. So when I'm presenting the results, I did I used the current green infrastructure site as a reference site. So I did the difference between the the scenario that I'm presenting and the current green infrastructure scenario. So say I was presenting the air temperature of the right-of-way, the no green infrastructure scenario. I'm taking the air temperature differences between the current scenario and the no green infrastructure scenario to create one plot, so that you can see how it changes in the model. So the first question is that, do these individual sites contribute to the neighborhood microclimate? And the results are shown here for both Nashville and Colfax. Remember, these are differences. And you can see with the absence of the green infrastructure site, the air temperature does get warmer in the neighborhood, and this corresponds to about a 0.25 degree Celsius difference. And this is measured at the, like say, if there was a climate station in the middle of the site at Colfax, and a 0.39 Celsius difference at Nashville. The PMV results for the same situation, and you could just see that people would be unhappy if the green infrastructure site was removed from the neighborhood, from the differences shown here. So yes, the stormwater green infrastructure site does contribute to the neighborhood microclimate. And so next I look at how shading contributes to, how site density and shading contributes to this climate. And to do this, I use the right-of-way green infrastructure with and without tree scenarios. And this is just a reminder of what those look like. So with the right-of-way Colfax green infrastructure scenario, when you add the right-of-way green infrastructure plots, you get a 0.32 reduction, degrees Celsius reduction at new small green infrastructure plot. This is an average value. And at Nashville, a 0.81 degrees reduction. So at Nashville, I created, if you could see, like Nashville, I was able to create new bump outs similar to the green infrastructure sites of Nashville. However, at Colfax, I wasn't able to create a new bump out similar to Colfax because of the neighborhood geometry. So this is why the number is a little bit higher at Nashville, because it involves larger green infrastructure space. And then with trees, you could see that there's increased spatial spread, especially when you have the right-of-way green infrastructure sites on parallel to each other on the streets. It's more intense in that area. And as expected, you have cooler areas with the trees implemented than if there were no trees implemented. So some general conclusions that I'll go through about the whole presentation is that green roofs reduce the urban heat island intensity by a maximum of 1.15 degrees Celsius. And even though there might be higher latent energy at the site, it doesn't necessarily translate into a lower temperature reduction. However, the caveat to this statement is that we are measuring at 4 meters above the surface. So if we could take layers of our green infrastructure site at low, and we did this in the model using the MVMAT model as well, you do see temperature changes at lower levels in the site. We just didn't have the ability to measure that in this area. So plant selection and density is important for long-term green infrastructure site maintenance, and stormwater GI sites partition more energy into latent energy. And so the plant selection comes, we also looked at how the plants changed throughout the study period. And you could see, or we saw in the graph, when the plants are smaller or if they're not doing as well, the latent energy is also lower. So sites not water limiting maintain a more consistent energy balance, and we saw this where Nashville maintained a greater than 40% latent energy level, whereas Colfax had fluctuated more, and it's more important for a more consistent energy balance, especially in heat waves or extreme events, because you want to that's when you want to receive the co-benefits the most. Air temperature changes at the green infrastructure site were local. If you could see that it wasn't until after we started adding the trees that you saw the more space, that the air temperature differences in the MVMAP model were more spatially distributed. And shading has an impact on air temperature reductions. So I just wanted to wrap up the three presentations that were presented today and why heat studies are so important. So this is actually the heat index value for my study period from 2013 to 2016. And you can see, and this uses the NOAA standard for the likelihood of heat disorder with prolonged exposure. And you can see that over the years, and especially in the summer, we have prolonged periods of dangerous period and extreme caution periods. And I'm not presenting this to show a trend, but just to show that within our climate in New York City, it's very important that we focus on this and try to create these comprehensive studies where we're using the connections between green infrastructure and heat or stormwater infrastructure and heat, because the most vulnerable populations suffer when you have this when you have prolonged exposure at the higher levels. So that's the end of my presentation. If you guys have any questions for any of us, I think we're all here to answer them.
Thanks, Lauren. So we'll take questions on any of the presentations. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just wondering if there's any evidence out there. I know you guys talk a lot about vegetation in particular, but if maybe going in there and retrofitting a building to produce less waste heat, could that have a possible impact on reducing urban heat island?
So I don't know, did all three speakers hear the question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I guess I'll try to answer that. So you're asking if there are studies out there that do research on waste heat that energy building efficiency. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of studies that do that. Usually when you install a green roof or some type of system, you do get, an energy efficiency summary, whether it's monthly or quarterly. So a lot of the green roofs that are being installed in New York City actually do have those numbers, and there have been a couple studies that have come out that looked at cost-benefit analysis and energy building efficiency in relation to green roofs.
Thank you. Guys, did you want to say something on that as well?
Yeah, to the extent that building density was a significant, positively significant predictor of temperature increase, I would say yes. It's just that we cannot apportion that increase into like waste heat versus in case of New York City, high building density areas is also high traffic density areas. So, and we know cars emit heat, especially when congested. So it's hard to apportion what type of waste heat most contributing. But yes, the data suggests that waste heat would be contributing to urban heat island effects.
your experience in New York City, have you seen, like, because I know green roofs have become a little, at least recently they've become more popular. Have you noticed any negative long-term effects that may stem from them, like structural or maybe even drainage problems off of, I guess, like a larger building?
So the question was if there's any negative long-term effects of greening rooftops.
Not that I'm aware of. This is Kizzy. We have a green roof policy in the city. It's a tax incentive, and so some of the city agencies, especially the park department, have implemented large-scale green roof projects, but it's not a very pervasive practice in the city. It's extremely expensive, and for some of the residential buildings, our building code and other safety codes often prevent access to the rooftop for residents, and so it's not significant enough, I would say, at this point for us to know if there's a negative long-term impact of the green roof.
Thank you.
We have an online question about trees. It's sort of multiple parts to it, but the question is whether you've noticed differences in evapotranspiration due to levels of soil compaction, and whether you need bigger tree pits to have more benefits from street trees. And then finally, just some questions about new trees versus mature trees, and what the city's position is on removing mature trees.
Yikes. Okay, let's try to take it from the top. So maybe Lauren is better versed on the literature in terms of the evaporation rates of thicker trees, but I can address a couple of the other pieces. So one, our tree pits are fairly standard in size, and the Parks Department assesses the types of trees that are purchased through nurseries and all of that in order to ensure that they're the kinds of trees that would thrive in the space that we have for them. I mean, obviously, space is at a premium everywhere in New York City, and so the tree pits that are fairly standard size, and therefore the trees that are purchased tend to be the ones that can, all things considered, survive, or tend to be hardier to survive in those pit sizes. And then lastly, sorry, what was the third part of the question?
The third part of the question was sort of the city's position on new trees versus mature trees.
Mature trees. Okay, so the city's position is that we love mature trees. Of course, it takes 100 years to grow a 100-year-old tree. So we love our older trees. Of course, there are many reasons why they have to be cut down or why they die, and the park department takes that very seriously. And so if they're infested with a pest or if they are fallen by a storm, then the tree has to be removed. I don't know that we have any policy in place that is, I guess, I don't want to say public, but I guess that is popular in terms of taking down trees for development purposes. As you know, again, it's not like we have a lot of development space in the city. So our larger trees tend to be in our forested areas and also in our bigger parks. So we keep those alive as long as we can.
I think the first part was on impaction.
Soil compaction, whether
yeah, I think.
Like the compacted soils in parks would lead to less evapotranspiration. Because of
less infiltration?
Well, I think this is an online question, but I think what was being inferred or suggested was that compacted soils have less moisture, and so there would be less evapotranspiration. So parks would be less valuable.
I'm not the best person, and I think there are other people actually maybe in that room who who could better answer that. There's actually, if you on the Sustainable Water Resources Engineering site, there's a thesis. There's a paper there that is it's kind of on this topic, and it also talks about tree pits, and so you might find your answers more on that. And then the other question was on Oh, it's by Beta Alade. And then the other question was on evapotranspiration and maturity of trees.
Yes.
So we didn't necessarily measure the evapotranspiration on trees, and so I am not sure. But in theory, it sounds like I mean, that's what we're going with, and that's how it was used, how it's modeled in these computer simulations. That a less mature tree does have lower evapotranspiration rates than a more mature tree.
Other questions in the room?
There are some more.
Oh, there's more. You want to read one? There's another online question.
Bryant Van Hole wants to know why, or sorry, wait, I lost it. Over what area the temperature differences are being calculated in Lauren's presentation.
Did you hear the question, Lauren?
Which portion?
I think it was near the end part. That's when the question came up. Like the differences in temperature that were calculated between the center of the site. Like he wanted to know the area that temperature difference was calculated because they're super.
Okay. Yeah. So I did it in the middle of the green infrastructure site. And then for the addition of for the new green infrastructure plots, like the right of ways, I took an average value in the middle of the site. So I mean, another component which I didn't talk about is that I used the field data which I collected to see if the model was working correctly. So I used that specific location where the climate station was located in the model. So.
You have another question in the room?
Yeah, so this may be just a clarification, but did I understand you correctly that the urban heat island effect peaks at nighttime? Or did I get that backwards?
So your highest urban heat island intensity is at night if you're considering an urban and rural environment. But again, urban and rural is relative. I didn't in this presentation, but in my thesis, I actually use local climate zones, which is how scientists or engineers now describe urban heat island intensity. So it's based on the climate zone that the study area is in.
Okay, and then did you look at or are you aware of literature that looks at the different effects of green space on the urban heat island at night versus during the day?
I actually did not hear your full question. If it was directed to me, can it be repeated?
Yeah, sorry. Did you look at or are you aware of other literature that looks at the difference in effect of in the urban heat island reduction of green space during night versus during the day?
So in other words, do green spaces have different effects at night or during the day?
Right, like if the urban heat island itself is not consistent across the 24-hour cycle, then what's the consistency of the impact you can have on the urban heat island?
Yeah, so I did look at it. Throughout the day, and it was greatest at night. Other studies, so yes, other studies show that as well. Again, the problem is that they're not doing the same green infrastructure sites that I'm looking at, the stormwater capture green infrastructure sites. So, but yes, that's a general trend that it's higher at your nocturnal urban heat island intensity is higher at night. Only if you're considering like a rural site as your reference.
I have a question for Kaz. the physical significance of that 0.02 square kilometer vegetation cover, after which, you know, you start to have almost a linear reduction. What do you think that is? Does that correspond to, does it have something to do with tree canopies and street widths, and have something to do with, you know, that once you reach that point, you have overlapping canopies, and so you get a more complete coverage of the street? Or have you thought of anything about what that number means?
I'm not sure, but some of the problem in answering question is that as you increase the, or decrease rather, increase the vegetative cover, the data points we have are less. One of the slides actually showed the data density of the points. So it's hard to say, you know, what continuity means.
I'm just wondering if there's a relationship between that number and where Lauren's modeling effort seemed to start to show impacts. In other words, you know, there were small impacts with just small green spaces, and then once you put the trees in and the canopies overlapped across the street, you started to see impacts, larger impacts. I'm just wondering if that's maybe somehow related to this, but yeah, I understand it's hard from the data that you have.
Yeah, but that's a great question, and unfortunately, we'll be working together, so we may be able to look into that.
Okay. Any other online questions? Any other in the room questions? Okay, so I'd just like to thank all three of our speakers. This was a really a lot of information here. I'm sure there'll be a lot to continue discussing. So thanks to all of you, and we look forward to seeing everybody next month.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.